Welcome. My name is Mike Yost. I'm your host, and I'm excited that you could be here with us today for the next installment of the Sesame Smart Manufacturing Mindset LinkedIn Live series, where in every episode, we challenge ourselves and our guests to think differently about smart manufacturing. So far in this series, we have learned from Sesame members and thought leaders that smart manufacturing should be thought about as a core capability on par with things like safety and quality. We've discussed the convergence of IT and OT. We've talked about sustainable manufacturing with some of the most seasoned and practiced corporate leaders that you can find. And we've also talked about the power of AI in manufacturing. Today, I'm excited that we're going to be talking about continuous improvement, looking through the lens of smart manufacturing mindset. And joining me today on stage are Lisa Zasada, the Director of Reliability and Improvement at General Mills. Welcome, Lisa.
Hi, great to be here.
We also have Patrick Gaughan, partner at Axial Manufacturing Systems. Welcome, Patrick.
Good afternoon, Mike. How are you?
Good. And lastly, we have James Ricci, a Managing Director at Ambe. Welcome, James.
Thanks, Mike. It's good to see everybody.
Excellent. Well, these are the folks that we want to talk to and hear from, and we'll jump in with them in just a second, but just a few housekeeping items first. First of all, if you don't know Sesame, you should. Sesame is the U.S.'s National Institute on Smart Manufacturing. It's a membership organization that's a public-private partnership with the Department of Energy. Sesame is driving technology, research, and education, and also helping to build the smart manufacturing ecosystem through events like this. They do this in partnership with SME, and so we like to thank SME for helping make these webinars possible. One of our goals with this webinar series is to zero in on a different way of thinking about technology, about leadership, about what it means to be a manufacturer. We are obviously live streaming now on LinkedIn Live, and we encourage you to add your comments and your questions. If and as time allows and is fitting with the flow of the conversation, we will try to include comments into the conversation. And then lastly, the event is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch the event again and again as many times as you would like to. So with that, let's get on with the show and talk with our guests here about thinking differently about continuous improvement. Lisa, I think we'll start with you. I'd like each of you to sort of fill in the blank here and finish this question or this statement. A smart manufacturing mindset says blank about continuous improvement.
Awesome. I think a smart manufacturing leader is really excited about continuous improvement because continuous improvement only amplifies the impact that smart manufacturing can have in our sites. And the two are really complementary.
Excellent. And I should have said also, would you take just a second and give a little bit of background on yourself and your role in your organization? Sorry.
Oh, I would love to. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Zasada. I'm a director of engineering with General Mills. I've been with the company for 23 years. About half of that was spent in our manufacturing sites. And the other half has been within our corporate engineering team. I currently have the privilege of leading a team that is leading improvements across our manufacturing sites. And as a part of that, we're also leading our digital transformation work.
Excellent. Phenomenal background. Thank you for being here. And sorry for not giving you the floor to do that
Perfect.
yourself a minute ago. So James, how about yourself? Would you complete the sentence here? Smart manufacturing mindset says blank about continuous improvement.
Yeah, so mine's probably a little more boring than Lisa's. I like Lisa's. But I'm going to actually go with, it really says you're strategically aligned about continuous improvement. In my eyes, kind of everything ends up coming back to your strategic plan and your business strategy. And that's where continuous improvement needs to be focused. And that's also where your smart manufacturing mindset needs to be employed the most. And I guess I'll also do my quick background. So I'm a managing director for Ambe Engineering. I'm in charge of their activities around digital transformation implementation, as well as just your run-of-the-mill continuous improvement, operations improvement stuff. So again, very complimentary, where the person who has to do those type of initiatives and activities for companies is also working on the digital transformation. And my whole career, I've been in and around manufacturing, running plants, working in engineering functions, to quality functions. So my whole life is all around operations. I love it.
Fantastic. Appreciate you being here. And so let's go to Patrick. And again, if you could sort of explain who you are and your background, what you do with Axiom, and then complete the sentence of what a smart manufacturing mindset says about continuous improvement. Nope, you were on mute, Patrick. There you go.
Thank you for that, Mike. Appreciate it. Good afternoon to the audience here, and thanks for tuning in. My name is Patrick Gaughan. I am a partner at Axiom Manufacturing Systems. I spent the vast majority of my career working for a Fortune 100 company in various facets of engineering, from traditional process engineering through supply chain, quality systems. And as part of that, I spent a good number of years in continuous improvement. Was the first black belt for our business unit. And that allowed me to travel the world, actually training up other black belts across the world within that organization. So that was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. A big advocate for continuous improvement. I'd say that in order to answer that question, Mike, I think that the key thing here to take away is that all improvements must be driven by data. And as long as the leadership teams appreciate that, know and understand that, that's going to help to drive everything forward, because without data, you get a lot of false starts, you get a lack of focus, and you get people that are confused and don't commit to the process necessarily. The second component of that is that continuous improvement must be recognized as a multidimensional opportunity. It affects not only the operation side, but also the design side. It's said that 80% of your costs are locked up in the design, and my experience tells me that that's often true. So if you really want to drive a big cultural change, make sure you focus on the design side.
Well, excellent. We'll come back to you in just a second, Patrick. But I just wanted to sort of frame for everybody what I think is interesting about the panelists we have here. Lisa is from a corporate engineering perspective at a manufacturing company, and James' organization helps manufacturers, oftentimes companies that are in distress, attack their operations, fix the problems that they're having. And Patrick and his team could work with folks in either camp, but works with James and team to make sure that if there's a technology component that can come along and undergird what's happening, that they provide those types of services. So I think it's a pretty interesting view of what we have here with the different perspectives from the folks that we have on our panel. And so, Patrick, just bring it back to you and throw out to the group as we look at where we are today and the data we have access to. Patrick, you just talked about that being, the foundation for making decisions. The historical foundation for lean has been centered on people. Now we have systems that are focused on data. Are we setting ourselves up to where we're taking the focus off the wrong area? Are we forgetting the people, or can these two worlds come together?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. And I think it's one that needs to be framed in from the perspective of that data is really the engine that empowers workers. I think traditionally we've gotten a little bit of a bad rap in saying we're just going to continue to monitor what people do and then browbeat them into performing better, right? And I think, that has changed significantly for the folks that really embrace this in a big way. And I'll speak specifically to my personal experience over many years as a practitioner. And I led probably about 50 different rapid improvement workshops around the globe. And so that's the basis for my kind of comments that going forward in any form as it relates to continuous improvement. I'm a big fan of rapid improvement workshops because it brings out a lot of value because people see change right away. One of the things that can be lost in that is the only way you can execute that cleanly and get the results you want is if you have data. If you don't have data, you don't have the basis for change. You don't know when you achieve success, and you don't know what to do. And I think that's really important. Now, if you take that back a step from rapid improvement workshops, historically, folks have used things like X matrix to be able to identify what are the business metrics that need to drive an organization. That filters all the way down to the people in the organization so that they can understand what is their role within the strategic alignment of the business. And I'm going to give you just a quick example of where this starts to take effect. If you look at setting a goal for a group or individual people, you'll start to see that setting a goal by itself doesn't mean a whole lot unless there's a basis for that. But the minute that you start to put those goals in front of multiple people, you start to set the stage for gamification, right? And now you start to allow people, empowered people, I would say, to be able to identify what are the things that are standing as roadblocks in their way, empower management to be able to take those roadblocks away so that they can see that performance improvement for themselves. And oftentimes you'll find people will start to compete against each other. So I don't think you ever really separate people from the data side because it's a great enabler.
So Lisa, how about from your perspective? Are you seeing any divide here, or if I capture what Patrick said there, that really the data is about empowering people, but the focus is still on them to be able to drive the process improvements?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think it speaks to the role of leadership in the midst of this challenge as well. I loved a lot of Patrick's points about we have to be grounded in data. And I think that actually ties into some of James's earlier comments too, about making sure that our strategies are delivering the need of our business overall, and that we're focused on the top opportunities. And that's where the need for data and the use of data is so critical. You have to make sure that what you're doing is going to deliver the needs of your business. But manufacturing absolutely is a people business. And so building capability and leading change management is foundational. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing that in the context of CI or in terms of a smart manufacturing initiative. And that's where making sure that you're leveraging your growth mindset and that you're leading in and really building new capabilities to use data in different ways. And that you're encouraging experimentation as you're continuing to drive these improvements. These are really powerful enablers of ways to use data practically to be a competitive advantage.
Well, Lisa, your point's valid because if you can, today it's like the ability to pull all this new and interesting data together to act, then people have to go and do something with it, right? So to Patrick's point, if we take the example of a rapid improvement event, there's so many times where people are like, well, I don't really have great data on this. And so you might go to a traditional lean fishbone diagram and you're doing your problem solving, but you don't have great data to help guide the team. So what do you end up doing? You sort of start to rely on the tribal knowledge and the other things. But if you can come in and go, look, this is what's going on with this equipment. This is the breakdown. This is what's occurring. This is the maintenance information, and all that data and information that you're pulling through the system now, you can get much more targeted. And the chances of success in a rapid improvement event, not just success, but sustainability, just goes through the roof. So these two things really come together to work together. It's like the people still got to go do it, though.
That's right.
So Lisa brought up something. Well, so Patrick brought up gamification. Lisa brought up experimentation. How normal is that? Do you typically, so I guess maybe starting with you, Lisa, you can speak to your organization. You said you've been there for 2 decades. So is whether it's gamification or experimentation, does the culture allow that and encourage that? And I'd like to hear from the others as far as what you see in other organizations that you deal with.
I think so. I do think we have a culture that encourages experimentation, but I would say that there's always room for improvement here and places to continue to progress as you're really leaning into what a learning mindset looks like. But one of the examples I was thinking about as I was reflecting for this was a point in time where in a manufacturing site about a decade ago, I was an operations leader and was leading some autonomous improvement efforts. And incredible team, incredible leaders, incredible people from our technicians that were diving in and trying to understand losses. But it was really complex. We were pulling data from about 4 different systems. It was time consuming, right? We spent more time just trying to pull the data together and look for insights than we did on actually leading the improvement. And it's frustrating. That's a really frustrating environment to be. And I think that's part of the reason I'm so excited about and passionate about smart manufacturing is we're getting to a place in our journey where we're going to be able to spend much less time analyzing data and just pulling it apart. And really equipping our teams with those insights so that they can go focus on the value-added part, on the improvement work itself. And I think that's just going to accelerate the pace of productivity in manufacturing overall.
It's the promise we've been waiting for.
I'd like to add to Lisa's point, if I could, for just a second.
Please.
One of the things that's really exciting about where we're at today is there's the opportunity to introduce technology that never existed before. So to your point, Lisa, there's folks out there that when you do your setup for a rapid improvement workshop or any type of continuous improvement, in the old days, you'd have folks out there with their, all their sheets of paper, writing down their process maps, right?
Right.
Today, you take a video, you load it up to the cloud, AI parses that thing out, aligns all the data, gives you all the analytics on that data. So as practitioners, we get the chance to focus on exactly what you said, which is we can go focus on doing the cool stuff that makes things better, as opposed to all the mind-numbing, data that goes out there. There's some fantastic companies out there doing wonderful things.
That's the hard part, though, Pat. Is like the tools for continuous improvement. They're well known. I mean,
For sure.
now whether somebody actually knows how to implement the tools, we'll save that for a different discussion. But if you tell somebody Hijunka, level loading, Kanban, like error proofing, they know what those terms mean. But when you start talking about something like what you just brought up, was like, oh, we'll just load that up to the cloud and parse it in AI. That's where you start to lose a lot of companies, because they don't know what they don't know. I was just in a plant last week, and they have very well invested equipment, good solid equipment, has all the capability to present up data any which way you want it. The thing that they were intrigued with the most was the fact that we could use their current security cameras to train in on a piece of equipment and say, this is how many pieces it made, this is what's going on with this piece of equipment, just from a security camera. And the owner was amazed, but he didn't know. Like, but yeah, if you told him, hey, we're going to put in a Kanban system replenishment back to this thing, you'd be like, cool, that's awesome. So some of this is just knowing and getting made aware of what these capabilities of what's out there.
Well, I think it's also a matter of trust, right? So there's a big portion. I think one of the roles of Sesame with this ecosystem is saying that we can bring in, I hate to call them different worlds, but we'll bring in the different worlds of, the technology people, whether that's in-house or it's external people, and it's the operations people, and how they come together. I know there's an organization that I've talked to recently where that connection organizationally between the folks leading sort of the smart manufacturing initiative and the folks leading the continuous improvement initiatives, they don't really work together. And we pointed that out to be, a concern. And so I'm wondering, maybe Lisa, from your perspective, what's that relationship like organizationally, working with the technology providers, whether in-house or outside?
Yeah, getting alignment internally is a really important part of the secrets to success within an organization, between your IT and your OT organizations, and then your manufacturing sites, and your continuous improvement initiatives in there. And I think it is a really challenging part of the journey. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution, but these different parts of your organization, whether you're big or small, generally approach problems in different ways. They have different things that they are perhaps incentivized on. And even more importantly, I think there's a different language, the language of data, the language of technology, and the data, or the language of continuous improvement and manufacturing don't always align. And so sometimes you can end up in conversations that it's really difficult to decipher what is being said by these different players. And I think this is where that role of growth mindset and learning agility is so critical. It's really hard as a leader, especially deeply tenured, to sit there in a conversation of that type, whether it's with a vendor or whether it's with an organization, even like Sesame, and say, I don't understand. I don't know what it is that you're talking about. That language, that terminology doesn't mean anything to me. And finding individuals that have the dexterity to speak those multiple languages is also a difficult skill set to find. I think it is something that we're working through and that we're figuring out as an industry, but that willingness to lean in and just acknowledge that there's a lot of growth that all of us have to lean into in the midst of this journey is really important too.
And James or Patrick, if you would like to chime in as far as how you see it, working you through your own personal experience, how the organizations work together, or as you work with your outsiders coming into a company, being brought in to help in a situation. I just know. I would say it was a belief of the past that lean folks think that lean means no technology, but I know that there are still people out there that believe that. So it's interesting to see, and I think positive for our industry to see folks like yourself that are embracing both sides of it. So I don't know, James or Patrick, your thought on how the organizationals are or are not working together?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a challenge that's very near and dear to my heart right now. If you hear a little bit of background noise, I happen to be on site at a very large manufacturer today, and we're working on that exact problem: is how do we start to get data structured to be able to tell a story? They're experiencing significant shortfall in terms of production, and they have a lot of data. However, the data is not structured in a way or contextualized in a way to point to what is the root cause of the problem. And what you find is that organizationally, and this is not uncommon, a lot of folks have pockets of information, right? And this is probably a carryover from the old days where knowledge was power and people wielded it that way. And I don't think it's quite as intentional today as it used to be when I was a young guy. But I see where there's just a disconnect where people have information, but it's not being shared in a way that allows people to maximize it, leverage it, and really move the ball forward. So I think, the blurring the line between OT and IT is going to be a huge benefit moving forward. Traditionally, a lot of things sat in the domain of the IT world, and they try to dictate the rules. But for anybody who works on the OT side of the house, which is the operations layer, you realize that those rules can't work, right? You can't have PLCs shutting down because of some kind of software glitch or network issue, right? And so the rules of engagement for the OT world are starting to expand in a way that we're starting to see these lines being blurred and people being able to leverage data to be able to come together. And that's just two departments, IT and OT, right? And so I think both James and I would say that our ability to be able to bring those folks together at the table at the same time has been wildly beneficial everywhere we go.
Yeah, the struggle I see at times is at 50,000 feet. I think we would all agree. It's like, okay, this is similar. And what we're trying to do is, drive out waste, right? Which is the classic lean term. We want to manage by exception. We want to understand and discern status at a glance. We want to improve quality, drive throughput, whatever those things are. Everybody agrees on that. But as you sort of start stepping down to what Lisa was talking about, the devil gets in the details, and suddenly people are talking about things that you're going, I'm sorry, how does this relate to status at a glance or driving throughput right now? I don't even know what you're talking about. And so, we're in this period where, individuals at certain ages, there are, should we say, experienced individuals, whatever term you want to use, they really need to step up and educate and figure this stuff out. To Lisa's point, it's like, you got to keep learning, you got to keep driving that and act as a bridge so that the next generation coming up who's going to just live in a digital world and never lived in the analog world can sort of combine the two together, whether it's OT, IT, whether it's operations and manufacturing and technology, whatever it is, those groups can come together and they can, in fact, that just becomes the language that they talk, as opposed to some sort of new language that there's half of a manufacturing organization is just now trying to understand what it even means.
I love that point. And the one build I would have is that I think one of the things that we as manufacturers can think about is who are the early adopters within your organization. And they might not be the experienced subject matter experts that were your adopters as of old. Those subject matter experts are really important. They're going to bring a lot of depth and insights about your systems. But look to those new hires, and they can be in a variety of different roles. They might work in finance. They might be a new technician joining your team. But those individuals, we are seeing that there are some really exciting new talented leaders that are coming in that have a dexterity and a curiosity and an intuition about data that we want to leverage to its fullest. And the great part about it is that it's really exciting work for them as well. They're going to change the scape of our landscaping environment, or the landscape of our manufacturing environment. And so those are really cool leadership opportunities for them as well. But look for early adopters in different places than you might have historically.
Lisa, that is a great and I say that because the best continuous improvement engineer that I had on my team was a gentleman that came over from continuous improvement. If he listens to this, he'll know exactly who it is I'm talking about. But the guy was absolutely fantastic. And part of the reason he was fantastic is because he could get the primary source of data, manipulate it in ways that other people simply couldn't do, and he could outrun anyone. And he became an evangelist for this, and it's taken off, in his career, and drove him to many different places of leadership positions in every business that he's been in. Great point.
That's cool. James, I was curious, as you're going into all of these different companies, small and large, are there different strategies that you've seen successful about bridging this gap of information, or about even awareness about new technologies or how to use data differently?
Yeah, there's for sure. I'll use a different General, like a General Motors, for example. They have a different level of, institutional knowledge and just horsepower that they can put behind this stuff. I think the rough numbers are 90% or 95% of all manufacturing is done by companies with fewer than 100 employees. I roughly that's the number. And when you step into those facilities, they're typically privately held. So now we got an owner operator, and finding the motivations for the why behind these activities needs to be tweaked. And so I find that, I have to really adapt. You got a general process that you want to follow, but you really need to, you talked about the people who want to evangelize this thing and get behind it. And you need that at an ownership level to make something like this happen. And so, you got to find those motivations. It may very well be, I'm a microman. I want to get out of the day to day, and I want to be able to sell the business in 5 years. And that may be the person's overriding, want and desire. And now there might be because they're a technology early adopter and they just love the gee whiz stuff. So all of those things, you got to figure out what the motivation is. And then I sound like a broken record. Then you tie it back to that business plan, because then it's not an extra credit assignment. It's like, we're doing this for a reason, and everybody can understand why we're going off and doing this. We're not doing technology for technology's sake.
Right. So I just want to encourage folks to continue to add your comments. And we said we'd go to some if we can. And so I think if we could, I'd like to throw up one question. Looks like Rhiannon has thrown up a question along the lines of where you were taking the conversation, Lisa. And we've been talking about the different parts of the organization. So I don't know if we can get that put up. Here we go. So question is it worth spending time to understand the social nodes in the organization as well? It may not be the people who have the hierarchical power, but their influence can help or hurt the initiative. So thoughts on that?
I love the comment. It's true, right? And I think the number of stakeholders that you're managing, when we think about the change that we're trying to lead, both on the IT and the OT and the manufacturing and the CI side, and the list goes on and on. Manufacturing leaders, supply chain leaders, it's incredibly complex. And regardless of how big or small the organization is, you're dealing with a lot of individuals. And you're right that the individuals that are doing the work and that are benefiting from a lot of these new capabilities might not be the same as those decision makers. I would tell you that from my experience, this is where storytelling becomes so critical, because bringing to life the way that these will impact and drive improvement on the plant floor, and drive the improvement in day-to-day life of our technicians and mechanics on the floor is really important. So I think building that skill set as technical leaders is critical, but also being really cognizant of who those stakeholders are and how you're communicating and speaking to those individuals is a really important part of the change management overall. I'd love to hear what the others on this panel have to say about this as well.
For sure.
Well, it's interesting because I even see a comment that I think Nathaniel made. Maybe I'll try to tie those two together because he was asking both of us about some sourcing data for problem solving. And so you go back to influencing the organization. I'll go back to the plant I was at last week where the two owners really didn't see eye to eye on much of anything. Although what they saw eye to eye on was the same top problem impacting their operation.
Cool.
And but one cared about data and the other one didn't. Okay. The other one's like, I've been doing this for 35 years. I got it all figured out. The other guy's like, here's all this data. But when you go, hey, what are the 10 actions that we're taking, whether it's by like our 35 years of knowledge or by what this data says, what are we actually doing to fix what we both agree to be the number one problem in the organization? And I got crickets. And this is where, no one was doing anything. And to your point, Lisa, about we're talking about this influencing, who else can we bring in, younger workers, other people. That sort of was a bit of a solution that we talked about. Like, look, you two aren't on the same page, but a lot of people know this is the biggest problem. And if we can pull the right people together, both of you should really be on board because it's fixing the problem that you both feel is the largest problem in this organization. What everybody then has to get comfortable with is they're aligned on why, they're aligned on what, but now they have to be comfortable with a different how. And how you go about doing that with data and smart manufacturing tools can be a little uncomfortable for people because I think, Mike, you even brought it up. It's like, I don't know what I don't know. So it's a tough spot to be in. So, but I think this whole idea of influence and bringing other folks in to the problem solving exercise, bringing them under the tent to try to help solve it really can go a long way with that.
I'd like to address the other part of that question that Rihanna asked, which was really interesting, which is to help or hurt the initiative. There was a very interesting body of work done by Gallup that talked about folks that were engaged versus disengaged. For every single person in an organization that's in the disengaged state, it requires 4 engaged people to overcome the inertia on the network. And that's a really important thing to understand because folks that are not engaged in the process can really undermine a lot of things. Now, oftentimes you'll find that some of those folks, while disengaged, they're just looking to find their voice. And if you can reach those people who are disengaged in your organization and empower them to be able to be the agents of change, they'll take that strong voice and they will jump to the other side. And I've seen that happen. And as an organizational leader, you have to be able to understand and identify that so that you know the right course correction to bring people in, because oftentimes it's just easy to try to sequester people. But I promise you that if you don't address those things and pull those people along for the ride, you're missing a great opportunity.
So
I think that's where that connection into experiments and small experiments can be really powerful too. I think intuitively, many people believe that they're good data problem solvers, right? But practically might not be, right? And might not even recognize the gaps in their own biases. And so I think finding those small experiments, whether it's use of simple tools like cameras, as we had talked about earlier, or using the data that's currently at their disposal to even show what's possible, I think just sparks a curiosity and the exploration of what's possible. You're modeling the behavior that you want them to see through the use of a small experiment. And I think finding those opportunities as well can be a powerful tool to convert some of the disbelievers that inevitably exist.
So sorry, Lisa, I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm just curious because we were using the term experiments.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, but I got to, in my head, I'm thinking of the word pilot. And do you consider pilot and experimenting to be the same thing or not? Because I don't know, maybe I'm not even saying they should or they shouldn't be, but I'm curious of your take on it.
I view experiment as being much smaller than a pilot, right? An experiment is just trying a new way of operating or a new way of solving a problem or a new technology. But I think this notion of pilot purgatory is something that we're all aware of and have experienced, I'm guessing, in some form or fashion. And it's true, right? It's easy for an organization to get buy-in for a pilot and then never move forward on it. And so, but when I refer to experiment, I'm only referring to trying a new way of working or a new way of solving a problem on a very, very small scale. So think of something that you can do within a day or a week.
Okay.
But I think about, I try to avoid the word pilot. I would tell you that that isn't the way that I was initially approaching some of our smart manufacturing journey. But I've moved really much further to a proof of technology and then a proof of value as very clear terminology, because it points to an end point by which we're going to make a decision as an organization. So we're going to validate the technology. We're going to validate that it can deliver value that we hope, but really being intentional about the milestone that you're working towards and the decision that that will drive, I think helps move the organization forward differently than perhaps pilot terminology. That's an awesome question.
To stick with that for a second, Lisa, if you do that proof of value, proof of technology, and you don't get the return that you're looking for, I'm assuming typically what I've seen happen is pilot means, oh, the pilot failed and that initiative's dead, right? But it's not necessarily deterring you from the path that you're going on. You've just proven that one approach won't work, so you have to find another one. Is that
right?
Accurate?
That's right. And that's, taking us back to the earlier part in our conversation too, where we talked about the strategy and about understanding your top opportunities. And Patrick gave some awesome examples as well about how generally, even if leaders come at it in different approaches, they often have good intuition about these are the biggest problems that I need to solve. Having alignment on what you're trying to solve, and this is also the connection into the importance of a smart manufacturing roadmap. Understanding what you're trying to drive towards to add business value then allows you the flexibility. If a proof of technology or proof of value doesn't go the way that you need it to or want it to, it gives you the opportunity to course correct and to choose something different, because the outcome that you're leading towards hasn't changed, but perhaps the approach needs to pivot. And I think really trying to distinguish those two allows you a lot more opportunity to learn.
Mike, I'd like to pivot on that point that Lisa made, and that is we talk a lot about having a pilot and it either works or it doesn't work, and do you set it aside when it doesn't work initially, right? And you lose all that momentum. I think that when it comes to great leadership, you'll find people that not only are not afraid to fail, but they will celebrate failure. And the distinction there is that the people that worked hard to try to drive, whether it's a pilot, an experiment, or just a change, and something doesn't quite work out, they celebrate that publicly and talk about how great it was that they attempted to be able to do something, even though they didn't obtain the objective, right? And so what we talk about then is, let's take that pivot. What did we learn? Can we bring people together, augment that a little bit, and let's take another run at that? And I can tell you, I'm not as afraid of the pilot process, because I've seen pilots that went from pure concept to $750 million business. And that's a really cool thing to watch happen. So I just want to reemphasize the fact that it's all about the leadership position in this and what you do with it. You can push people down because something failed, or you can celebrate it.
That's an awesome point.
Yeah, dare I say it's a mindset, right? So, James, I wanted to come back and just ask the question. I framed up earlier that James and his organization get sent into companies that are need help in this front on the operations side. Oftentimes it's in crisis mode. So is there a difference, James, in your experience between crisis mode and non-crisis mode? And if so, what would those be?
Yeah, it's interesting to just give people kind of a flavor. So you're often sent into a manufacturing plant. The manufacturing plant does not want you there. And you're there to help. And so it's not even like central office. You're almost like, the other team. So you're not in an environment where everybody's like, hey man, come over here. Let me show you my problem. Can you help me? They're more trying to find a way to shoo you out the door. So it's a different environment to be in. It's not for everybody. I'll be the first one to admit that. The interesting thing, though, bringing it back to smart manufacturing, is this is a real opportunity to try new things and do things, because you're in an environment where I wouldn't be there, our team wouldn't be there unless things have really broken down. I mean, at this point, we've probably done all the typical stuff. We brought in our own engineers, and we're still not getting production where we need it to be, or quality where it needs to be, or efficiencies where they need to be. So the next thing you know, if you can bring in some cool technology that would allow you to find, like back to what Patrick talked about earlier, get really good data to find out really what is going on with this problem, you have a much greater chance of success. So the example I use is a lot of times I'll get dropped into a plant, let's say it's an injection molding plant, and they point to this machine over there and they said, that's the most important press in the plant. And, it breaks down all the time and it doesn't run the way it needs to run. And then you ask, well, why? And of course, then nobody can give you an answer. And that's why you're there. So I could sit there for 24 hours straight with my little notebook and write down every time the press goes down and what happens. But I can't stay awake and I can't stay focused for that long, for 24 hours straight. And really, it's not super value add. But guess what? I can put a camera on that machine. To Patrick's talking about AI before, I can train the camera to know the same thing I know. I can look at this press and go, it's running. It's running at cycle time. It made a good part. A lot of times that's kind of the basic start of anything. And so we're able to come in and stay away from using the current sort of IT network. So we lose all the change management, loss of momentum around IT and cybersecurity and all this other stuff. We'll set up an independent system. We'll look at what's going on. We'll have our system get aggregated and start getting data to start reacting and doing something. And guess what happens? That company goes, whoa, this is good information. And it only took you 72 hours to start pulling really good data down. Well, this is great. And the next thing you know, hey, can we set that up on this machine over here? Because we're having a problem over here too. And you can actually accelerate change. And then I've had situations where by the time you leave, they probably want you to leave, but they kind of like what you did, and they're ready to kind of take that on. So you have it's the old adage, don't ever let a emergency or whatever go to waste. I mean, you can
crisis.
Yeah. That can accelerate change, and you find all the influencers, because they come out of the woodwork when all the crap's going on, and they're like, hey, what's going on over here? They're really interested. So it's a different way of implementing technology where you think it would be a bad call, but in my eyes, honestly, I'm a pretty expensive asset under those set of circumstances. And my ability to go back to other people and go, hey, we need this technology. It costs X. There isn't an ROI. There isn't this long-winded proof of value. People decreed it's important, and the technology gets proved out, and you kind of accelerate your change. So it's really interesting, but it's definitely a different take on how to implement a smart manufacturing mindset.
But you're creating pull and energy for it with what's possible, and that's super powerful. Is it a different approach than what you take for a company that is not in crisis?
It is, because you can, right or wrong, you can get away with, you have a little bit more dictatorial authority to make something happen. And I don't like to use that term, but the reality is you're there to do a job. And in that particular set of circumstances, there's a little bit more, you can be a little bit more mandate oriented and a little less, how do we, let's do this all together. I prefer the do it all together approach, and I will try to bring everybody along. But if, there's a couple people who are deciding that they don't want to go that way, you always have that ability to mandate, which I think most people in those circumstances understand. So it's, in some ways, it's a little easier in that regard. In that regard, in other regards, it's a lot harder, but in that regard, it's a lot easier.
So I have a number of things that I want to talk about, but we are running low on time, and there's a bunch of stuff that's flowing in from the comments as well. Lisa, there's one. Well, there's a question about cameras and why we're promoting cameras versus sensors and things. And unless I'm inaccurate, guys, I think you're basically using those as examples,
Just
not
examples.
saying that you can't use sensor technologies and things like that. Is that
Sensors are fabulous as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
There's a whole
Okay.
suite of tools at your disposal.
so?
Yeah,
that,
the beauty of cameras is they act like multiple sensors. You can do all sorts of different fields of view to be able to gather disparate pieces of information and contextualize them. Whereas generally sensors are single point, cameras happen to be multi-point. They'll run 24/7 just like a sensor.
I just want to come back. There have been a couple questions, Lisa, directed to you in this experimentation, small experiments area. So Nathaniel, if we can put the bottom one up here. Yeah, if you could maybe take a look at this one, Lisa. Ask if the team members involved use statistical or data analysis techniques, and if there's anything there that you can talk about in the results.
Yeah, there are. I think experimentation can happen at a number of different levels. Exactly what we were just talking about here with putting a camera on and testing intuition is a great example of an experiment. Let's see, but using statistical or data analysis techniques, we're doing some really exciting work right now with data in our manufacturing floor and contextualizing it using models. And absolutely, there is a strong component here of data analytics and statistical analysis. And so having that expertise and bringing it to bear on some of the more complex problems is a really cool part of the journey. It's unlocking some of these higher order problems that we have talked about and know intuitively are there, but have struggled to really put the science behind. And so absolutely, this is at the core of it. The science of it is a really important part of going after some of the bigger losses within your journey, for sure. It's an awesome question.
Yeah, and I would
Lisa,
say
partner those folks together, the data scientists and the operators, to
Yes.
Yeah.
We are. They're partnered very closely together. And this is where that language and the terminology and how we build pipelines and how we think about data these are different languages. And but bringing together the power of that really just amplifies our journey and what we're driving for results.
Yeah, to your point, Lisa, when you're talking about data contextualization, data modeling, et cetera, I mean, you're singing the Sesame song, right? So those of you that are not familiar with Sesame, that is really foundational to what Sesame is all about. So I would encourage you to learn more at sesame.org or join as a member, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, we are sort of heading toward the end. There was one thing I just wanted to ask about. All the conversation, I think, have been very positive, but maybe just a quick round robin here. First of all, if there are any potential pitfalls or challenges that you see in leveraging data, the way that we've been talking about here to drive continuous improvement. And then after that, we'll just let everybody have a last shout out here with your takeaways from the day. So,
do you want us to answer those together or are those separate? What would you prefer, Mike?
Let's go separate. Why don't you tell? Are there any pitfalls or challenges first? You want to go first, Lisa?
Yeah, I think Jim Wetzel actually did a fabulous job of speaking to this during the first session on leadership and the importance of leadership within a smart manufacturing mindset. But at its core, this is all really simple work, right? It's just people, process, and technology. I think it's important. Technology is advancing so rapidly, and it's really exciting what potential and what opportunities are there that even a year ago weren't available. But it's important that we don't lose sight of people and process. This is where we have to build capability. It's where we need to continue to support. It's where we need to lead change management. And where we will fall short on that, the improvements won't be sustainable or they won't be embraced within a manufacturing environment. And so it's really important. We've talked even in this conversation a ton about the technology, but that we don't lose sight of the importance of building digital capability and proficiency within our teams, continuing to use and to teach how to use data to solve problems, even our existing data, and that we're reinforcing and continuing to grow in our maturity of how we use process. These are the core foundations of any great manufacturing organization, and they're even more relevant in a smart manufacturing world.
Fantastic. Patrick, anything to add to that from a
I'm going to lead with the weirdest, strangest, probably most controversial pitfall. When I was taught to be a black belt for continuous improvement, my sensei told me, when you organize workshops, you gather all the people that you can that are the folks from the process, the stakeholders, identify all the people that are support roles for those workshops. And whatever you do, never invite the supervisor from the department to the workshop. And I laughed. I didn't think he was serious. I thought it was crazy, right? And he said, no, he said, listen, history told him that oftentimes when you put that team together and their supervisor sitting there, all they do is look to that supervisor to say, okay, what's the right decision? How do we do this? And he said the best way and the only way that he would allow us to do it was to bring the highest ranking person in the organization into the first day of the workshop, minute one, and talk about the fact they could do anything they wanted as long as they didn't jeopardize safety and they didn't replace money for brains. And so they were completely empowered from that point forward. And the workshops worked. And so the supervisors were then forced into a role to say, okay, I'm going to, whatever my people come up with, we're going to do that. And so it kind of flipped the dynamic in a way that was very empowering for people. So that sounds weird. I violated the rule once and had to remove the supervisor because I didn't learn the lesson. So it really is true. So I think as an overall message to kind of wrap this up is that people matter. They will always matter. Encourage data as a way to evangelize the people, empower the people, and help them get to a position of greatness.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. James, how about you? Any pitfalls or advice to add to what's been?
Yeah, I think, again, you heard the word that appeared the most with Lisa and Pat was people. So I will finish that one off with what I say is technology changes exponentially. People change logarithmically. So consequently, when all of this stuff keeps going and changing, and then you're modifying your processes, and you wonder why you can't sustain or something's going on, is because the rate of change is greater than what the people are able to or willing to take on at the time. So if you don't recognize that, you've immediately kind of set yourself up for failure. So you need to understand that people will probably be the pacing item in there. And so to me, that's what I always try to kind of build it around, because at the end of the day, what we're all talking about, it's data, it's this, it's that. Well, at the end of the day, people have to go and execute. People have to understand the data. People have to react to the data, or, you could argue you don't even need the data. If you're not going to do anything with it, why bother spending gobs of money on technology to collect it and parse it and synthesize it if you're not actually going to go do or change anything people or process wise? So, so my thing is you got to keep people at the forefront.
Excellent. Well, why don't we go reverse order here, just with one takeaway? If somebody, one thing to walk away from here today and go, they learn from this session, what would you recommend that be? James, we'll start with you.
Okay, it's more than just cameras. I'll start with that. It's definitely more than cameras. And the other one I will put out there is, I think we've talked a lot about where things intersect and align. I think you will find that there are divergent points around traditional lean practices and activities, and you need to recognize those when they show up. The biggest one for me is just for people to recognize is there's people are big on whiteboards with scribbling information down on whiteboards and manually tracking data on a piece of paper, and they feel like you lose something when you go to a fully digital world. There's ways to bridge to those gaps, but you have to recognize that there's going to be divergent opinions on some of the digital tools and how they impact the organization. And if you don't recognize that, that you can kind of run yourself into some problems.
Thank you for that. Patrick, how about you? Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that we should never, ever lose sight of the fact that a highly detailed and granular process map is the pathway to success. When you have all the information at your hands at the very granular level, you can do very powerful things, whether that be on the design side or the operations side. I think that's an important piece moving forward. And I think, you have to be able to take some chances. Don't be afraid to fail. And for God's sake, be a participant in this race. It's really cool.
Excellent. And Lisa, you get the final word here.
I love it. Thank you. This has been really a ton of fun. And I'm very passionate, hopefully, as it came across, about the manufacturing environment. These have been some of the best leadership experiences of my career. I've grown a ton. It's fast-paced, it's dynamic. And I think increasingly for individuals that are looking for opportunities to work with cutting-edge technology, real-time data, we're going to be looking at new ways of working that are going to transform the manufacturing environment in the US and beyond. And I'm really excited about the future talent that is coming forward and that's rising to this challenge. There's a lot of opportunity to be had.
Well, that is a fantastic way to go out. It's been a great, almost hour-long session here. So many, many thanks to everybody who joined us, to Rhiannon and to Edna and Nathaniel and Brian and folks that commented. Certainly our thanks to Lisa and James and Patrick for your time here, and your knowledge and your sharing. That's all part of building this ecosystem. Also like to thank SME for helping to build this ecosystem alongside Sesame, making these events possible. And again, just in closing, I would like to encourage everybody to get to know Sesame, to follow them on LinkedIn, to go to sesame.org. You can stream previous versions of these events on Apple Music or Spotify, and encourage you to come and join us next month. We hold these events the last Tuesday of each month. So we'll be back September 26th. Again, on LinkedIn Live, we'll be looking at Sesame's Smart Manufacturing Acceleration Framework, which is a tool they're rolling out nationally to build a framework for helping people figure out what smart manufacturing means for them. And I'll just make one other plug that email newsletter went out recently promoting the annual member meeting. The 2023 annual member meeting for Sesame will be held at South Tech in Greenville, South Carolina, October 24th to the 26th, in partnership with SME at their Smart Manufacturing Experience. And you can find details on that at sesame.org. So with that, we welcome you back again. And until then, when you think about smart manufacturing, please think differently. Thanks, everybody.